Okay, everyone, we are going to get started. Thank you for coming to this session. It's great to see this attendance, and we also thank members of the task force and the author trainers who have worked very, very hard to put this together. This is the second session we've had today. We met at 10 this morning and went through this agenda, and no disasters happened, so we're going to be doing it again. We also will have the same session next Friday at 8 a.m. So if you have colleagues who couldn't attend today, they can attend next Friday. And we will also be posting this session online. So it's being taped right now, and you can direct your colleagues to that also. As you know, this process began in April, and since that time, the APASP task force has been working very, very diligently, having weekly meetings as a full task force, and also many subcommittee meetings. We have a framework subcommittee and a criteria subcommittee and a metrics subcommittee, a communications subcommittee, and we've also gone through a pilot of our process about a month ago, and we learned some very valuable lessons from that are the impetus for these trainings that provided a lot of good guidance and best practices that we want to share with you. We've worked very, very hard to communicate as much as possible the details of our process, and if you've been away for the summer, we're jealous and we're happy for you, but we hope that you will refer to the website and take the time to go over all the information that's posted there. We've really worked hard to include as much as possible. The website is umt.edu/APASP, and we've also sent out weekly communications that we've hoped you received via email. We've distributed handouts today, and these will be available online as well, in addition to the PowerPoints that we will show, so you'll have those for later. The handout that we've distributed, you'll notice that it lists the criteria and metrics on the left. On the right is a lot of blank space, and that is for you to engage during this session in taking a lot of notes. As you have ideas that come to mind or questions, please start your writing today with ideas that you can use for your full report. So again, this is a working session that we hope will help begin you in this process. Another important point is that this process is meant to be very collaborative. So many of you have been identified as authors, but we hope that you're not the sole person working on the report. If you have other colleagues in your department or program, or for this is administrative services. If you're doing academic programs, those sessions are tomorrow. So we hope everyone is in the right spot. This is for administrative services. But within your unit, we really hope that you will collaborate and work together with your colleagues in writing the report and reviewing it and finalizing it. So quickly to go over the agenda, we'll begin with an overview of criteria and metrics. And this is not quite like the open forums we've had the last several months, in that we do have a formal agenda, and we need to allow time to get through all of these. So as we go through them, there will be some Q&A as we follow the guidelines. But please let us get through the full program without too many questions and getting us off track. Also, after the overview, we'll go through a data discussion that Don Russell will present, including how we'll be submitting our reports online. And then that will be followed by writing tips. From the pilot, we learned a lot of good lessons, and the author trainers have been super in developing guidelines and in helping you to put your best foot forward. This is a process that is critical for our university as we plan for the future. It's a process about resources, and as you are writing your reports, you are basically striving to communicate why investing in your area, your administrative service, would be beneficial for the university, and why a decrease in investment in your area would be harmful for the university. And as you review the criteria metrics, you'll see that all of them have some relevance to that. So with that, I will turn the time over to our criteria and metrics experts.
So my name is Stephanie Domitrovich, and I'm an academic advisor at the university. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the first criteria. Some questions that have come up that we'll just address to begin with. It says that there's a 250 word limit. That's 250 words per bullet. And Dawn, correct me, but we don't know if it's going to be 250 words or 2,000 characters, but those are very similar in the amount of space that you would have to write. So it depends on Exceed, the software that we're using to submit all of these, but you do get that per bullet, not for the whole criteria, okay? So the first criteria is about the importance to UM. So it talks about essential services that the unit provides and how that aligns with UM's mission and vision. So some of the things that we've talked about as a task force is how we're going to combine both the UM 2020 strategic plan and the strategic vision document that's out there. And you'll see another place in the criteria where we do specifically address that strategic vision plan, but this is speaking to the UM 2020 strategic plan that we have been operating under. So how does your unit specifically value or address leadership, engagement, sustainability, and diversity? And if you have any questions about what we're looking for in those, there are some definitions of those so that you have a better understanding of exactly what you can speak to for those criteria. And then one thing that we did see in the pilot is that for that second bullet, the justification. So people talked a lot about what they did at the university, but more justification about how those services might be essential, and then again, how if there were limited funds or less funds provided to you, how that would impact the university, or if you were provided with more funds, how that might enhance things that happen at the university.
Okay, then I am, is this on? Hello? I guess it's on. Never mind, I'm just not, yeah, okay, I'm probably not close enough. So I'm going to talk a little bit about criteria 2. This criteria considers the demand of the unit services, and it's broken into 2 bullets, one internal users and one external users. And I know that this will mean something different for different departments. Some of us work with external partners, others maybe don't work as much with people outside the university, but think about it broadly and think about what you see as internal and external to your department, because external could even be something like compliance. Are you in compliance with whatever, the regulations or the procedures, processes for your office are? So I know that it will look different for different people, but what we're really looking for here too is trends. And so 5 years of data is going to be pulled from Dawn's office. So what we want you to do is give us the trend, sort of what's been going on in your office, and do it in more specific terms. Don't tell us that your demand is growing, because that doesn't really tell us anything, because it's too slippery. So if you can, give us numbers, give us specific trends. I mean, even if it's just trends in, a certain service being used more or whatever, but anytime that you can use a number and something more concrete, that's going to be a lot more helpful for us. We learned a lot from doing the pilot, and that was one of the big things that came out of it. People wrote cool things about their departments, but there wasn't really anything to measure. There wasn't anything that we could really, that had context to it. So I would say being concrete and putting context to what you're talking about is probably really important. And, probably some people will have more to talk about on the internal side, some will have more to talk about on the external side, and some will be equal. But everybody's, because everybody's departments are different, in the administrative services side of the house.
Can we open it maybe for questions, just for a second? You can get a mic as well. Questions so far on the metrics? Let me grab you a mic.
Just a second. So we just have to use a mic because we're recording the.
Thank you. Hi, could you clarify what you mean by internal and external?
So internal would be students, other departments, staff, faculty, anybody who's an on-campus constituent, I guess that's would be my definition. External would be things like, for career services, my department would be, employers, alum that we work with. So that's kind of the split, like constituents that are based on campus versus off campus.
This is a question for you, Dawn. Don't get nervous. So, well, just as far as data coming from you only, we have an enterprise level software that we use that tracks everybody that uses our facility. That's acceptable to use? Absolutely. Okay, that's all I need to know.
We have a question in the back. That's all.
You said you were going to load 5 years of data from each administrative service. I'm just wondering where you're getting that and how we know what that is.
Yeah, so I have a whole section on that. If you're really interested on the data that we're going to provide, that's going to be the second bullet in the agenda, if we can hold off on those, okay?
Hi everyone. My name is Anissa. I'm a student here at the U, and I'll be addressing the third criteria. This addresses quality, so this criteria considers the quality of the services that this unit provides. Is there a reverberation that's happening? Okay. So all of the bullet points seem pretty straightforward, addressing internal assessments, professional development activity, research and creative scholarship, and if your mission has teaching and instruction as a part of it. One recommendation we have that we learned from the pilot was that a lot of this information that was provided was really non-specific and didn't really tell us much. So we're asking all of you to be extremely specific with these opportunities, perhaps provide concrete data or information that you have regarding them, so that we can actually assess something concrete.
And then as far as that one goes, like I know we're asking for national or industry benchmarks. If that is available and you have a governing body, you could absolutely include those things. As far as providing citations or links to those things, those can be provided within that, but remember that that would count towards the 250 word count or the character count that you would have in those sections.
Okay, and then as for criteria 4, efficiency. So this is really trying to nail down where funds are coming from that you use to support your departments. So we all have different models, and I guess I partly was chosen to talk about this one because Career Services has an interesting way of being funded because we are funded from 3 really different sources. So we have general funds and we have designated funds because we can generate our own income. We don't receive any operating expenses, so we have general funds for personnel, we generate our own money for operating expenses, and then we have a job location development program, which is a grant program. So a little bit of our department is funded by a grant matching program there. So for each of you, you need to think about that, you know, where your funds are coming from. And I know there's a pretty easy way to, I don't know, easy might be like relative, but you know, where you're going to break down how you're being supported, basically. It gives, one of the bullets gives you a chance to explain if you are able to generate any income and how much of that is, you know, supporting your department, kind of a percentage. The bullet that talks about efficiency in terms of, you know, improving efficiency, demonstrating what you've done. Again, I would try to be concrete about that, as concrete as you can, and I would be careful, at least for me, I know I have a tendency to get stuck on, we've all experienced a lot of budget cuts over the last several years, but I think being really straightforward about it is a better way to do it, just the facts, you know, don't go into a whole bunch of detail, because we really are more interested in, you know, going forward with that. So, so I would just say, you know, talk about the budget cuts, tell us what happened, but don't perseverate, I guess would be my thought on that. And then this is there's a direct bullet that talks about, gives you a chance to talk about what kind of impact the budget cuts that we have experienced, you know, what has happened, like what kinds of things have happened to your department because of that.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Zelmer-Quaresma and I'm with Athletic Academic Services, and I just want to share a little bit about the opportunity analysis criteria. It considers the possibilities for growth in regards to collaboration, restructuring, and growth, and this is a pretty exciting one and I think a great opportunity within your reports to project what can we do at the University of Montana, what can your program do, directly address the strategic vision plan and how you can contribute to that, and how collaboration efforts can grow or continue or be created across campus. It directly talks about restructuring and being efficient and cost-saving methods. And so use your creativity here. This is a great opportunity to say, I recommend that we do this in this area. It would be great for our program if we work closely with this department and we collaborated in this way, but give some specific examples. Everyone in this room is important. We know that. Everybody at the university is important. And it's going to be very difficult to do the process, obviously, and things that we're going to be faced are challenges. But this is a great time to say, how can we grow? How can we make changes? And how can we make the University of Montana better? So the opportunity analysis is a time where we can project and move forward and find ways to do things better if we possibly can. And with that, since all 5 criteria are done, we'll open it up for any other additional questions if anybody has questions.
Can you clarify the use of links? Oh, sorry. I'm wondering if you can clarify the use of links in the document, about being able to use those links, and then if people are going to read the material you link to.
Yeah, my understanding is that links can be embedded in the form in Exceed, but it's a rich text form, and it will count towards the 250 words. But that the task force isn't keen on going out to read additional information.
You shouldn't use, hi, I'm John DeBoer. You shouldn't think about links and citations as a way to throw additional information at us and to get more words into your report. It should just be a place where if you make a big, bold claim that seems like it might need verification, that's where we would go to verify some information. So don't send us to a website and say, read sections 8 through 9 of our accreditation standards. Instead, refer to that accreditation standard and link to it, just in case we want to check.
And just as a point of feedback, going through the pilot process, and some have made reference to it already, but as we were meeting as a group to talk about the pilot process, it became very clear as we were scoring things for people who answered, or departments or units that answered questions either inflated or trying to get as much information as they could in there as possible, whether it answered the question or not, that we couldn't match up the actual score with the content. So, for example, basket weaving. Somebody submitted a report on basket weaving, and within that report, they scored really, really low, but we all knew about the basket weaving program, which is really, really high program and valuable to the University of Montana, but we couldn't justify scoring them high because in our mind, people had a great experience about basket weaving. So it is very much give the exact answer or address the exact question in this process. And I think Kelly will probably talk more about that in the writing tips thing. But as a committee member who is, a task force member who was trying to read that information, it really became clear quickly who was trying to write because they have skills in writing and they've done a lot of publications, they've written a lot of text, they've done a lot of work, but they weren't actually addressing the questions that we needed them to answer so that they could score well in the process.
I have a question. I have a pretty good idea of what is a good score for 1 through 4. I have no idea what scores well on criteria 5. Having a great idea about cannibalizing someone else's department, that's a joke.
That's a good question, actually, though. I would say the collaboration efforts and pulling things together with other departments, if it isn't a collaboration effort and you can just restructure, say you're going to focus in your administrative service unit on something as, I don't really know how to give an example without using a particular department, but a program that you offer within your administrative unit, can you put more funds into that or focus your department on, or your unit on that instead of something else you have in the unit that's taking place? So I don't know if that clarifies with it, but I'm going to use Lori for example. So they do interview processes and practice interviews and sessions. I wouldn't cut this in a program, but say they put more resources of their career advisors into daily appointments with students and less on interview practicing skills. Not promoting that in any way, shape, or form, so I am making that disclaimer. But say Lori came through on the report and creatively said, we're going to cut back on our services and our interviewing to save $100,000, and we're going to redirect $500,000 of that to professional individual advising or career service appointments, that we would save the university $500,000 on the end, or $1 million, sorry, the number was $1 million, and then $500,000 on the other end. That would be a restructure, or that would be an adjustment, and that would be something that Lori could tell us that she would prefer to do than us coming in and saying, Lori, could you please cut your interviewing program and cut the number of individual appointments that you have for career services? Is that clear at all?
One other perspective that came up this morning that kind of answers your question is why for criteria 5 are we focusing on the strategic vision that was just developed, whereas in criteria number 1, the focus is on the UM 2020 strategic plan. And the reason for that is, as we evaluate quality as departments, units, the focus the last 5 years has been on the strategic plan that was already in place. So it really isn't fair to ask people to evaluate themselves based on a vision that was just developed. However, as you look forward, we can focus on that vision for criteria number 5, and that's the hope, is that people will look at that in their future planning.
And I would add one more thing is the percentage of weight on number 5 is less than the other percentages. So that is taken into consideration as well.
Will we have the opportunity to incorporate figures, tables? May those be uploaded? And if so, what are the limitations on number of figures, tables, et cetera?
A couple of those details are still being worked out as we're trying to work through the software. You can upload, you can create tables within the software, and you can upload images. How that impacts the word limit is what I still don't know just yet.
And what about other formatting things like bullets or indents? Will all of that come through with the system? Okay.
That was a yes.
I just wanted to clarify, the academic departments, like geography, for example, they are no longer an administrative unit, is that right? So the academic services is now part of the academic programs for those departmental, okay.
That's a yes.
Well, Don, should we go to the data?
That's dearer. All right, so I'm Dawn Russell. For those of you who don't know me, I have the pleasure of leading our IR office called UM Data. Outstanding group of individuals, and I just want to make you aware that we are a resource for you for the next month as you're going through this, not only on the data that I'm going to talk specifically about, but if you need some help thinking about how can you most concisely organize some other information that you want to put in, that's what we do for a living. So happy to help you out in any fashion on that. I want to talk about 2 points of the APASP process from a technical aspect. One of them is the true submission of this. How is this going to work? The linchpin of the whole process is going to be the author that gets identified. Now, if you looked at the unit of analysis that's currently posted on the website, there's a lot of blanks on that unit of analysis. We have sent out a request to the sector heads to get those populated as soon as possible. If you have not heard from your sector head and want to make certain you get identified as the unit of analysis, please talk to your cabinet member and make certain that they relay that information to the task force so we can identify you. The author is really our point of contact. They're going to be the ones that are going to receive the main information. As Nathan was saying, it is not our intention for them to be the sole writer. They're really the point of contact. We expect them to disseminate all that information out to whoever needs to be seeing it in terms of writing the reports. But we have to have a point of contact so that we can get that information out there. And I want to make it really clear, because a lot of times there's this, well, I'm not on the list and I don't know what's going on. I want to make certain you understand that that's what that author is. That's our point of contact. So if you're not getting information, that's who you need to be talking to. Around September 1st, September 4th, somewhere around the Labor Day time period, you're going to receive a link from the task force, or an email from the task force, that will have a couple of pieces of information. One of them is going to be a URL that's going to take you to the spot where you will input the data, not the data, but the response, the whole thing. It's where you're going to make your submission. Said this morning perfectly, you need to think about this website not as an editing tool, but as your finished product. We strongly encourage that you use Word to put your stuff together, navigate with everybody else, edit, modify, all that kind of stuff offline. And when you're ready to submit, you would go to this website that you're going to get a link to. The author is going to have the password and the ID to get into there. Again, that's where that author is really important. So you'll get that link in that email. You'll get some directions, more information about how to use it. We'll address whether or not it does bullets. We'll address whether or not you can put links in it, the pros and cons of all that. All that information will be in there. And then the third piece that will happen is any data that comes from the central office. All of that will come in that first email that goes out. From then on, what happens is the ball's in your court, and the APASP task force is just going to be sending the friendly reminders. It's 10 days until due date. You haven't got your file in yet. Those types of things. And that's, again, going to go to the author. Okay? Any questions on the process of how this is going to work? Need to get a mic to you there.
Thanks, Jeannie. Dawn, just a clarification. We have a couple of people identified as authors for different unit analyses. Is that, should there be just one person?
I need to work that out still with your staff on the Exceed to see whether or not there can be multiple. Right now I'm allowing for multiple because a lot of times there's a good reason. I was talking with a gentleman this morning, and you guys need to think about this. He's going to be gone the last week of September, and he's listed as the author. Any questions that we have, any changes that come up, if he's not available, they're not going to know what's going on. So there's a good reason to have a backup. I just need to make certain that we mechanically know how to do that.
Okay.
So the long answer is leave it the way you have it for right now unless you hear otherwise from me.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so let's switch gears now in terms of the actual data that's going to happen. Now keep in mind that the whole point of the prioritization process is to think about how we can explain what's happening in our areas and decide where we want to make strategic investments or de-investments if necessary, okay? You need it to be data-driven. In an academic world, that makes perfect sense. We have some common pieces of data that exist across an academic. You have majors. Every academic has majors. Everyone does degrees. Everyone generates credit hours. Everyone has faculty. There is a long list of pieces of data that are consistent across all of academics. Administratives, not so much. So what actually ends up happening on the administrative end, there's no consistency that we can say across the units except for two pieces of information. Your FTE that you actually have, for those of you who don't know the lingo, that is a full-time equivalent employee. So if you have two people that are working 0.5, they count as 2 head counts, but they're only 1 FTE in this report. So how many people are actually working full-time to support your unit? The other piece of information that we have available are the expenses that are coming out of your area. Now, I want to stop for a moment to talk about expenses. A lot of discussion and a lot of focus on this campus is around budget, and it needs to be. We need to have a budget. But a budget is a plan. It is not what actually happens. Everything that's in APASP is focused on expenses. So there were some questions this morning about, well, wait a second, I get some of this budgeted here, and how do I budget these and all that? Don't worry about those questions, all right? Only think about how did you actually spend the dollars that were earmarked for your particular department expenses, okay? 5 years worth of data, starting with FY13, going through 17. Now, the thing at the bottom there is what I want to really highlight. This is information that's not on this sheet that you were given. If you actually look at the criteria sheet that's out on the website, you'll see a section that's up at top that says required program information, but not weighted. Now what that means is the information that we're going to talk about for the next couple of minutes has no bearing whatsoever on these weights that these ladies just went over. This information is meant only as information. It's a resource to help people look at what's happening. But because they're so different, I mean, the task force had conversations. We've got units that have 1 person in it. We have other units that have 400 people in it. How in the world do you actually weight that and justify that and do anything useful with that? So you can't make these part of the weights. It's only information that's provided to you. Okay, so yeah, if you click the next one. All right, so what happens here, these are the 4 things that appear up at the top of that actual form there. The first one, these are all unweighted. The first one, you're asked to talk about your mission and all that. I can't help you with that. That's you guys doing that one. Item B is actually talking about some more information that I can't help you out with. But let's talk about item C. Just go ahead and hit twice. Oh, okay, that's fine. Go ahead and hit it again, Amy, I'm sorry. All right, so what item C is trying to do is get at the information that I just had up there, your FTE and your personnel and expense amounts. Notice the big red that's up there on the top. This is departmental data. Now, APASP is meant to look at the services that you offer, not necessarily the financial structure that's in place at your campus. Example that I used this morning is HR. When we evaluate HR, when the task force is looking at HR, they want to know whether or not we're doing well. Do we have enough emphasis on payroll operations? Do we have enough emphasis on recruitment operations? In business services, there's a big split in all those kinds of things. APASP unit of analysis is very specific. The data doesn't support that. So what's going to happen here is this information is going to be at the departmental level. This is going to be all HR specific information, okay? Next slide. What you're going to be asked to do then is to take that departmental data and split it down to your units of analysis. Now, if you only have 1 unit of analysis, kudos, you're done. There's nothing to split. But for HR, who actually has 4 or 5 pieces underneath there, they have to estimate how much of their current total workforce is doing each one of those particular pieces. Okay? Now this is still in that informational piece. It's not being weighted. So don't spend hours and days trying to get the exact numbers, going back through payroll records to actually find out how many hours everybody worked and all those kinds of things. It's just a good general feel of what you think people have been doing. So if you got 1 person who's doing equally 2 units of analysis within your department, you'd put them down as a 0.5 FTE in each one of those. Okay? Question?
Yeah, I have a question. Is this, the last screen, was that for each of the 5 fiscal years? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for this next screen, are you wanting folks to do that for each fiscal year?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, thank you. I just tried to do some screenshots. The way that we have this set up right now is there is a table per fiscal year. So when I grabbed it, I didn't grab the title that said fiscal year, but you'll see a table for each fiscal year. Okay? I want to stress again, this is really, really important because we do have challenges with our data, which I'm going to go over here in a moment. Don't get choked up that the data isn't accurate. We have processes on this campus that prohibit us from being able to report the information the way that we all want it to work. So this is information. I want you just to keep thinking about it. It's just trying to give context to the readers about your unit. Do not get all choked up saying, oh crap, I'm going to lose my unit because you've lost $10,000 that I actually gained in revenue and your numbers are all wrong. Don't worry about that. The task force knows that there are challenges. They're very well aware of that. So all they're using is for this to get some kind of a context. It helps them understand a little bit more about your unit. And I'd guess if someone actually really wanted me to make a guess, I'd say that we probably pick up 85% of the information in there. So it's not like they're way off base, but they are not going to reflect the exact numbers that you're looking for. To that point as well, nobody expects when you take this piece right here that you're supplying, nobody expects it to add up exactly to the number that I had in front. Because again, the number in front has some data challenges. So if you can, in your details, fix those data challenges because you know something, do that. But don't fix it to the point where you all of a sudden have 40 more people than what I have in the front. Those are the type of things where the task force is going to go, whoa, time out. Something's not matching up. Okay? So let's talk about the challenges. For the administrative services, basically what ends up happening is this campus works very much on what's called indexes. And I don't want to slip into very detailed information, and I know this usually bores everybody, but it's important that you understand the challenge that we have here. An index is a shortcut for a structural financial stream of how we record things. An index process is almost unique to UM. I've had consultants come in and we talk about our financial system and they're like, what are you talking about with index? It's something that we use on this campus and it has become ingrained in how we talk, think, and work. What happens is we have thousands of indexes. And if I was actually going to be able to use an index to provide financial information, my staff would have had to take those thousands of indexes and map them to the 200 administrative units that we have in our units of analysis. I would have spent the entire summer trying to do that kind of mapping. So we couldn't use indexes. We just didn't have the ability to do that. We have to use organization numbers. These are the standard banner files that are used to record financial data. The problem is, because we are so ingrained on indexes, we have done an outstanding job of keeping our indexes up to date. Everything's matching the way that you want, but we never knew that all those organization structures were behind the scenes. So we now have created a disconnect between what you always think is happening with an index and what I have to pull from an organization standard. Now again, keep in mind, I said it's like 85% accurate, so it's not going to be a huge difference. But that's the reason why a lot of times you'll be looking at your data saying, man, Dawn's just totally lost it. She doesn't know what she's doing there. I don't have that information available to me to record it the way that you want. Okay, so that's what that first bullet is talking about, and if you want to know more details, I'd be happy to show you exactly how it impacts your units, or any of my staff would. The second one is kind of a repeat of that as well. The fact that we have to do it at a departmental level or an organization level, and you need to be able to split it down into the units of analysis. Let's talk briefly about FTE. One of the challenges with the FTE data, we are going to calculate an FTE for you. Now, we've done a lot of work since January working with units to get their FTEs calculated. Whether you realize it or not, this campus has adopted a definition of an FTE calculation. For an employee who's actually worked, they have to work 280 hours in a year to be a full-time FTE. unless they're an academic unit, and those are usually, I'm sorry, not academic unit, an academic employee, and those are usually faculty, then they have to work 15/20. All right? So when we calculate an FTE, it's actually very easy because behind the scenes, whether you know it or not, even if you're a contract employee, HR records how many hours you're working every time you get a paycheck. So we have that data available. We simply go in, add it all up, divide by 2080, and there's your FTE calculation. All right? Seems pretty cut and dry. But the linchpin on this is HR has to have those hours in the system. And we've gotten much, much, much better at this, but this wasn't a focus 5 years ago. 5 years ago, they didn't worry as much about getting the hours accurate. So an example, it doesn't necessarily pertain to you guys, but a great example is their summer teaching employment. When the teacher or the faculty member is actually given a contract, a lot of times they're told, we'll give you $3,000 to teach this course, okay? What HR would do then is simply put $3,000 into the payroll system for 1 hour. So now when I go to calculate their FTE, we got a little bit of a problem in terms of how much work they're really doing. Again, that doesn't impact any of you, but that example happens periodically. So that's why you're going to see sometimes your FTE doesn't quite match up. All right? Another one is that the expenses are not always recorded in your unit, in your organization. This is something that we do on the campus as well, is we think, okay, I apologize, the best examples, and I spend way too much of my time lately in the academics, so the examples that I know of is in the academics, is the dean will create a pot of money when they make a budget that the sole purpose is to backfill the departments in their college when a faculty member's on sabbatical. They're going to buy somebody else to teach those courses, okay? It's budgeted in the dean's office. What should happen, what best practice should be, is that money should be passed from the dean to the department when they actually give that department the backfill. We don't do that. The expense stays up at the dean's office, and they go ahead and pay that faculty member out of the dean's office. So what has just happened now in the data that I'm going to be able to provide for you, I don't have that. I don't know that. It's not in your organization. That is a deal that you made with your supervisor that you're going to get money, but you never tracked how that money was going to go through. Okay? So there's challenges there on the data, and I apologize, I spent way too much time on that. But I think it's important that you understand, a lot of people say, you know, we can't get the data right and all that kind of stuff. I promise, we are trying very, very hard to get the data to reflect what you need, but we have to change practices on the campus so that we can report it that way. Okay? Questions on that?
So the FTE, does it include student employees at all?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it does. Anybody who gets paid out of payroll.
Okay, so on the previous slide where we'll have to enter that data, is that also including student employees? Because some of us, I have 100 student employees.
Yeah, so my advice on that would just simply be the pool that you're paying them out of. Okay? And the question that came up this morning, well, how do I calculate an FTE because I got 400 students in there? Again, just estimate what typically happens. I know I got 400 students. Each one of them typically works 10 hours a week. They're working for 10 weeks. Multiply that out, divide it by 2080, and you got your FTE. Okay? Just estimate. Don't choke to get it exact.
So for the units that are primarily grant funded, how does that show up then in terms of the data and number of FTE and expenses and these sort of things?
The same way, if any dollar is running through the UM system, it gets recorded the same. It just gets earmarked as being whether it's research or whether it's general funds or designated or whatever.
So is then the task force going to be able to see that this is a, you know, all this funding is actually grant funded and not state allocated?
Yeah, so on the very first slide that I presented, it would say, it had general funds and it would say personnel and expenses, and then below that in the table it says other funds, and it had listed there, I think, designated auxiliary, grant would be one of those, foundation would be one of those. Each of the funding sources is listed, okay? Okay, so let me talk about then item D is another one that we're going to be able to help you out with. What we're trying to do on, oh, sorry, one more question.
Just to follow up then, so in terms of the use of resources that is being scored, is it the use of state resources or is it the use of all resources, both grant funded and those that come from the legislature?
It's actually both, but in our process, we are focusing on general fund first, but we are including every single resource in this process.
The obvious question is why, but
For program prioritization, it's a big picture process, it's a big picture thinking, and it's program evaluation. And so we're looking at how can the university be the best in its management, and that's across the board for academics and administrative services. And it's not unique to the University of Montana. Institutions doing it all over the country for best practices. It just seems a little odd to some of us sometimes because we're going through some difficult times right now, but it's something that should be done on a regular basis. What we're discovering in the task force is that we do a lot of things because it's always been done that way. We have a running list of information and questions and things that are done, and we're asking, why are they done this way? Who has made those things the way they are? What's happening with them? Why are they causing roadblocks? Why is our data being impacted? We're running those questions so this can be an ongoing process so that we can be more effective. If you ask anybody right now, why do we have this program? Why do we have this unit? Why do we have administrative services in this area? The standard answer is, it's always been done that way. Someone shook hands with someone behind the scenes. We thought it sounded good because we didn't necessarily have it at the University of Montana. We're trying to compete against some other institution, but there's no concrete reason, and we can't really find the reason behind those things as to why we're doing things. And so I personally think it's a great initiative that we're doing the program evaluation across the board, and in the long run, I think it's going to benefit us. I just think that we're struggling with it a little bit right now because of the circumstances we're under.
Okay, so switching now to item D. Again, this is the non-weighted information. This is given to you only as a resource, or to the task force as a resource to help understand your unit. So again, we're not going to worry about it being specific, but what we're trying to do here is actually find out how much standard services that are on campuses are done within your unit. Okay, there is, if you've been tracking this at all, there were some documents that were out in June that talked about an ABC reference. What ABC is a movement that's starting in higher education. It's a national benchmarking thing that tries to measure how much does an institution of a certain size need to devote to different key areas. So we're trying to get some national benchmarks for administrative services. While we're not participating in ABC, we're going to try and mimic a little bit of that ABC stuff. So we've identified, 20 or so areas that are going to be listed on your form. You're not going to have to do anything with this. It's just going to be a form, and it's going to say, business practices. And then underneath that, it's going to say they do the accounting work, they do procurement, they do HR hiring, those types of things. We'll give you definitions for what each of those mean. All we're asking you to do is go in with a little checkbox and say, yeah, I have people who do that. I have people who do focus a lot on hiring. This is where the definition of those areas are going to become very important, because we could probably say we all do recruitment. We should all say we do recruitment, but we want to target what we're actually talking about on recruitment in these. So all that item D is going to be is a list of different items, and you go in and you check whether or not you have anybody in your area that does that. Okay?
Is that different than the first iteration of this? Because I believe when we first went through this, you checked those services that you used external to you. Has that been switched?
I don't think that was the intent. What has changed is we originally asked for what portion of the individual's time is doing that. We asked for the FTE that was related to it, and we're not asking for that anymore. But
Okay.
the intent was always to understand what's happening within your unit of analysis.
Okay.
Okay?
Then also, as far as the check mark, right? So what if it's just 5% of their job in the year?
And that's where we'll have to give you some guidelines.
Okay.
That's where those definitions are going to become very important. That's what I noticed from the pilot was that people without guidance, yeah, everybody check they do recruitment. Well, I'd argue that really they don't in the spirit of what we're trying to do. Okay. All right, I think, is that, oh yeah, one more piece that I want to, I can't read from the side. Oh, yeah, so that's what I just went over. So that would be the fields that we did. That's why I was confused. Okay, so the last piece, and the task force met this morning, and they did have some discussion, so this is actually a little bit out of date. But the first bullet is important, and I want to stress it, that do not assume that central data answers all your data questions. As these guys said, as they were talking about the criteria, this needs to be data supported. The challenge is that I cannot provide it for you, but you should. So make certain that you're providing data and hard facts within your information, okay? And the bullet that I had there, I guess it's still kind of true depending on how you weight it. Think about, as we talked about at the beginning, if you want to put a link or a citation in there, as John said, the citation takes up words. The link is going to take up words. There's a lot of reading that's going to happen here. Is it necessary for people to actually go out and look at that? So be creative and strategic on when you use those, that you cite them. But at least as you put down, don't just say that my national organization says that I rank such and such. Define what that national organization is and make certain that you give good description about where you're getting your information if somebody did want to go back and research what's happening. Okay?
Does the system or the program allow you to do a hyperlink to save on characters, or
You know, I do apologize. I wish I knew the system a little bit better. My instinct is probably that you'd have to copy that link and then put it in there, and then it may become a hyperlink, but I'm not for certain.
So for the required program information section 1 through 4, how are those going to be uploaded?
Great question, and I think I glossed over this when I was talking about the process. So go back to that email that I talked about when you get that on September 1st, 4th, somewhere in there. Along with the link to this website where you're going to enter this data, you're going to get a data sheet. You're going to get these tables filled out, okay? So it's going to go to the author. That's where you're going to get the information. Probably what you have to do then is just go ahead and upload it when you actually make the submission so that we have your submission and the data together in one file, okay?
On the non-weighted criterion, is that a 250 word limit as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, if there aren't additional questions, is that on? Okay. We're going to move on to report writing tips. My name is Amy Kinch. I direct the Faculty Development Office, and I'm here with Kelly Webster, who directs the Writing Center on campus. We're two of the author trainers. There's 8 of us, I think. And we've been spending the last month working with the task force trying to identify tips that generally could be helpful to you all as you try to approach this task. We appreciate that this is a really busy time of year for everyone, and we've been trying to just come up with some ideas that might make the approach at least a little bit easier or clearer. We also got some of these ideas from some experts who visited campus in the spring who had conducted prioritization on other campuses. And so you'll hear as we go along, some of these recommendations also come from them. So first, I want to talk a little bit about just thinking about starting out with the content that you want to start pulling together for initially drafting your reports, your unit reports. The APASP process is similar to that of program, center, and unit standards review. However, we don't recommend simply copying any of those reports, like accreditation reports or standard reports. Authors can certainly mine those for key information, but you should definitely address sort of the direct criteria given by the APASP committee, as I'm sure you're taken away already by what they've said. All the materials you're submitting can and likely will be made available to the public, so keep that in mind when addressing personnel issues or proprietary operational information. And be advised that all the centralized data is also public information. You're encouraged to use data that you've collected, as everyone's mentioned, to describe your unit and your impact. And you should be conveying the role of the unit and its contribution to the university or to a component of the university, if that's more appropriate, kind of as your main focus. Sort of as you're writing throughout all the sections, be thinking about where you sit in the institution and what you contribute. For formatting, the length of the responses, as you saw, is limited for each bullet. So concise language and prioritization of the most important information will be crucial elements of the report. There's no penalty for not using all of the allowed words. And I know the committee would probably be thrilled if all of you did not use 250 words for every criteria, but just be sure you've addressed that. And one thing that came up this morning also, if something really doesn't apply to you, say you don't have any external audience, for instance, like you only serve internal constituencies, you can write NA for that. And then it's up to you if you want to add one sentence as to why it's not applicable. That shouldn't really be used if you just can't answer a question, but if something truly doesn't apply to you, that is allowed by the task force, and they'll take that into account in the scoring system. Consider using a table or chart to represent complex information. And as Dawn said, we recommend submitting just final versions in Exceed and drafting in Word or another software program. I think it would be smart to go into Exceed fairly early on just to get a sense of how it works, and especially if you think you're going to build a table in there or something like that, just to understand it. But I wouldn't be doing multiple drafts with multiple authors within Exceed, from what we've learned about it. The task force members reported that bullets with supporting data can be very effective in terms of delivering quite a bit of information pretty efficiently, so you can feel free to use those. Dawn mentioned a little bit describing data sources with specificity. So an example might be that you would say, like, according to the 2015 American Association of Engineering Student Survey, the following, or you would have that name in parentheses. You shouldn't have AAE with no date. You really need to be specific about dates and times, because it just makes the argument more compelling as you're reading through it. And links will use up your word count. So I think it's a judgment call how much time you want to spend on that. And in the same vein, don't assume that readers will look up data outside of your report. Don't link to annual reports or write available upon request. The committee will not have time to review additional material or websites. So links have limited value in terms of that as well.
So I'm just going to talk about a few writing tips, additional writing tips and strategies, and then we'll have some more time for questions. I'm sure many of you already have a whole host of ideas, different types of data and content that you can include in your reports. I think it's important to remember that really a large part of the ballgame is being able to really clearly communicate that content and those examples, your arguments, your evidence, that data. We mentioned earlier this morning to the Administrative Services Group that I think that it's important to keep in mind that the reviewers want to see the value of your program. And we as writers, the authors, have to do everything we can to remove barriers for them to be able to see into the value of our programs. It reminds me of when, if you're on a hiring committee and you're interviewing an internal applicant and you're so frustrated because you know that person is a rock star and they are not giving you the information that you know they could be giving you. So we want to give a few more tips just about how to ensure that you're communicating clearly, and also so that you're not demanding that the reviewers expend a tremendous, they're already spending a tremendous amount of energy in reviewing your reports, so how to make sure that we don't ask them to expend an unreasonable amount of energy in reviewing your reports. So first, accentuate the positive. I know it's a difficult context. It feels very high stakes in which we're writing, but try mightily to orient your report positively by focusing on possibilities, so being forward-looking for your program or for your units, rather than focusing or dwelling on past wrongs that impact your unit. So for example, instead of sort of complaining about things that have happened to your programs, many of us are functioning very efficiently because of many cuts that have happened, to talk maybe about unmet demand instead, right? That's a way to reframe it in a positive way, that you are poised to be able to deliver X, Y, and Z if you had the resources that you needed to be able to do that. You can, of course, acknowledge the constraints on what you've been able to do, but try to keep the overall tone positive. And again, just remember that the reviewers are reading hundreds of these. Be as brief as possible. This is going back to the data a little bit. Be as brief as possible in mentioning errors in data, and instead focus on why your program is structured the way it is and how that structure helps students and the university. You can use your limited space to primarily evidence your excellence and your value, rather than talking about the inaccuracies in the data. Again, earn the right to claim that your program is excellent by providing evidence for that. So one of the things that came out of the pilot, with the pilot reports, was that many people had sort of abstract positive claims about their programs and units, but they remained at this very kind of vague, abstract level. You need to earn the right to make those claims by providing the evidence. Similarly, you can address your unit's past performance and or budgeting, but try to connect that information to the rationale for future opportunities and needs for the unit. So again, sort of like that example of, you might talk about unmet demand. You haven't been able to meet demand, but you could if, okay. I think really important, and Amy already touched on this a little bit, keep in mind that you are writing for a general audience. You are not writing for peers who are necessarily already experts in your content area or in your field. And so as a result, that should help to dictate your choices about language, for example. So avoid using too much jargon. Even Amy's example of don't just use acronyms, because your audience isn't necessarily going to know what they stand for. So keep your language accessible by imagining an audience of intelligent readers who are not familiar necessarily with your content area or program. Also, it's fine and probably preferable to write in the first person. So you'll certainly name your program, so information technology or the writing center, but then saying our and we, right, that's a natural way to be writing. And try to keep your writing active, so in active voice, just who's the actor, who are the actors, what did they do, and what was the impact? So as much as active voice is always more concise as well. One other thing that sort of came up a little bit this morning, in the same vein, there's this thing called the curse of knowledge, where you are an expert in your area, and everything that we do in the Writing Center is so important to the university. And I know that one of my things that I'll have to try to avoid is wanting to say everything. Well, we have this word limit, right? We only have 250 words per bullet. that part of our task, in order to make the job easier for the reviewers, is to prioritize what information is going to be most important for them to be able to clearly see what our value is. So don't be aware of that curse of knowledge. And then finally, test the clarity of your writing by inviting others to read your draft report, and try having others from outside your unit or your program read your report, asking them whether they feel you've actually answered the questions. I know you know your content so well that sometimes you may not be able to see where there's gaps in your explanation. So having dress rehearsal audiences who might look like the general audience that may be reading your report, I think is a good idea. And this isn't up there, but one last thing that we talked a little bit about this morning, and we'll show you the website in a minute, but do go to the website and don't just look at the criteria, also look at the rubric that the reviewers will be using. The rubric aligns with the criteria, but the rubric gives you, I think, additional insight. The rubric and the weights for each of the categories gives you additional insight into what the reviewers value, what we as an institution have decided that we're going to value. So I think looking at that rubric as alongside the criteria while you're writing is a good idea. And on that last point about using test readers, to that end, we will be offering workshops, 2 for academic services and 2 for academic programs, which really will be that opportunity to bring in your draft and work collaboratively in an environment like this where you can get feedback from other readers and also get some ideas about how other people are tackling the same challenges that is this report and how to communicate your value to the audience. And then the trainers, the 8 of us, will be sort of floating around and trying to help. And then later, right before the deadlines, we'll be offering a couple of polishing sessions, which really is just fine-tuning kind of those last stages. Gosh. Questions?
Thank you. This is regarding your tip about subjective material. I'm just wondering, I know that in the past there's been some discussion about qualitative data versus quantitative. Is there a place, and to what extent is the qualitative data acceptable, and when does it become more subjective and so therefore maybe a little less useful or acceptable?
I'll just say my understanding, and then the task force members can fill in my gaps, but qualitative data is also empirical, right? Qualitative data is as well. So if you have surveys, if you've done focus groups, all of that is reasonable to bring in as a type of data that you can use. I think the dubious claims are claims like, man, if UN didn't have my program, the retention rates would be way down. So we increase retention, and to leave it at that, I haven't earned the right to say that. So what is it that we do that actually gives evidence that that is the case? I don't know if there's...
Okay, I'll add to that. Just want to make certain that if you are going to provide survey information, you want to give the standard context about the survey, how many people took it, and all those kinds of things. Don't just put out there that we had 100% people say we're great, and then it turns out that only one person did your survey. Okay? So you need to have the full context of your survey, not just that final piece.
A question related to the qualitative empirical data. How about a letter of support or commitment? Say your external stakeholders or a federal or state agency that you serve, and you get a letter of saying this organization center is imperative for our mission and for us to deliver our services. That volume to the report itself.
You're going to have a word count problem.
Yeah.
What do you think about quoting the letter?
That's what I would recommend.
I would say if we can access and see what it is, but we're not going to spend a lot of time going to additional outside links. And John, maybe you want to step up and address this question, or do you think? Put him on the spot here.
You know, a letter of support is great, but I think if you have an outside agency that you have a contractual relationship with, I mean, you can point to that relationship and you know, describe the length of time and how much of a commitment has been made by this external agency. And that should be okay for us. I mean, the same thing happens in program review and center review, that those kind of things come up. But we're not going to have time to pull up your letter from the USDA and say, oh, okay, that's good. Just cite it, and if we really feel like it's dubious, we'll go looking for it. But a lot of this is on the honor system as well.
You might include just a short quotation from the letter. That would probably be helpful.
Just real quickly, I'll show you, if I'm sure many of you have been to the website. It gets updated frequently, so visit frequently. When you get those campus communications, that means there are real updates that might be consequential. But just a couple of things that I want to point out. So at the top, if you go to About, there's an updated terms and definitions. And some people had some good questions this morning, I think, about how to interpret certain words like quality or essential, what is essential to the institution. And so the task force has put in a lot of effort into trying to clarify for us as the authors how they will be defining some of these terms. So take a look at that. Even so, for example, terms like diversity and sustainability, which are in criterion number 1, definitions for those terms and how the task force members and reviewers will be defining those terms. The other, I think, useful place is the APASP process, and this is where you will find the criteria, the updated criteria and metrics, the rubrics and weights, and also the categories, which are the categories into which the programs will ultimately be put. And some of these terms here are also listed on the definitions sheet so that we can have a shared understanding of what we actually mean when we say some of these things. The last thing I think that's important from this is there is now an author training site, so you can find all of the dates there, and we will be posting the video of this, so if you have colleagues who were able to attend, and then also our tip sheet will be, the tips that Amy and I ran through, will be posting a PDF of those there.
And the PowerPoints.
And the PowerPoints.
Are there additional questions on any topic now? We're all done with our content.
I was just going to add one point that I just learned about that exceed is that you can save a draft. So though it was mentioned probably best to create it in Word and draft it in Word, you are able to save a draft of that in that exceed software, and you're able to print, if you're a print person, you're able to print what you've submitted, and you'll get a confirmation when you submit it. So for those peace of mind things. And also just, you know, we're doing those workshops for the author training, but just, you know, there's one person listed as author, as Dawn mentioned, but just make sure you're writing these collaboratively with your unit so that it's not, unless you're a one-person unit like some folks, but make sure you're involving others.
Yeah, and one other thing that I forgot to mention about the software is that you can save a PDF of your final version, and that PDF will be saved by the task force, and at the end of all of this, all of those will be posted out on the website. So.
Well, thank you all very much for